Rain had been falling on Holloway's Reach for 3 days straight, turning the mountain pass into a river of gray mud. Daniel Reyes wiped the water from his eyes and watched the sky split open above the ridge. The colony behind him held barely 400 people. The thing coming down through the clouds could kill all of them in an hour. The alien ships came low and fast, sleek and black like beetles dipped in oil. The raiders who flew them called themselves the Vorun. To them, humans were a nuisance, soft creatures clinging to a worthless rock at the edge of charted space. They had wiped out 2 other human outposts already. They did not bother to make threats. They simply arrived and began to burn. Daniel was not a hero. He was a frontier defense soldier, one of 9 left to guard the only pass into the valley. His rifle was older than he was. His armor had a crack in the left shoulder that let the rain in. But he knew this pass better than anyone, every loose stone and narrow turn, and he meant to make the Vorun pay for every step they took toward the people sleeping below. The first wave hit at dawn. Energy fire turned the rocks to glass. Daniel and his squad fell back in stages, dropping charges behind them, collapsing the narrow channels to slow the enemy down. 2 of his people died in the first 10 minutes. He did not have time to mourn them. He kept moving, kept firing, kept buying seconds. It was during the 3rd fallback that he heard the sound. Under the roar of the guns and the crack of the stone, there was a small, sharp cry. Daniel froze. He looked down the slope and saw it. An egg, no bigger than his helmet, pale gold and webbed with cracks. It had rolled out of a shattered nesting cave the Vorun fire had opened in the cliff. Nobody knew dragons still lived in these mountains. The colonists had thought them long gone, hunted out generations ago. But there it was, rocking on the edge of a crumbling ledge, and as Daniel watched, the shell broke open and a tiny gray head pushed free. The hatchling looked up. Its eyes were huge and dark and full of terror. Behind it, the ledge was giving way. Above it, a Vorun gunship was lining up a shot at the squad. Daniel had maybe 2 seconds to decide. He could keep running. The creature was not his. It was not even human. No one would blame him, no one would even know. He ran toward it instead. He heard one of his people scream his name. He ignored it. He slid down the wet slope on his side, reached out, and closed his hands around the small shaking body just as the ledge fell away into nothing. The gunship fired. The blast caught the rocks where the hatchling had been and threw Daniel sideways into the mud, the creature tucked against his chest. He came up running, the dragon cradled in one arm, his rifle forgotten somewhere behind him. Fire chased his heels. He could feel the heat of it through the crack in his armor. The colony gate was 400 meters down the path. He told himself he would make it. He told himself that with every step. He made it 350. The shot took him low in the back, a glancing hit that should have killed him outright but instead burned through him slow. His legs went out. He fell hard, twisting as he went down so he would not crush the small thing in his arms. He lay there in the mud, the rain falling into his open eyes, and he felt the hatchling press its face into his neck and cry. The gate opened. Hands reached out. Colonists dragged him the last 50 meters, the dragon still locked in his grip. They pried it loose only when they had him inside behind the shield wall where the medics could work. But there was nothing to work with. The wound was too deep and the help too far. Daniel Reyes knew it before they did. He asked one thing. He asked them to keep the little dragon safe. A young medic, a woman with mud streaked across her face, promised him they would. He nodded once, slow, and then he was gone. The Vorun did not break through that day. Daniel's collapsed passes held them long enough for a relief ship to arrive from the next system over, drawn by the colony's distress call. The raiders, who had expected nothing but easy slaughter, were driven back into the sky. They left the way they came, confused and angry, unable to understand why a settlement of 400 soft creatures had refused to simply die. They buried Daniel 3 days later on the hill above the valley, the one that looked down over the pass he had held. It was a quiet place, green and high, and the colonists agreed it was right that he should rest where he could watch the road he had given his life to guard. They had no fine stone, so they marked the grave with a flat slab of gray rock and carved his name into it by hand. The hatchling came to the funeral. No one led it there. It simply appeared, walking on unsteady legs through the gathered crowd, and went straight to the fresh mound of earth. It climbed onto the grave, turned in a slow circle the way a dog settles for sleep, and lay down across the cold dirt. The colonists tried to move it that evening. It would not go. They tried again the next morning and the morning after that. It refused food. It refused shelter. It only lay there on the gray stone, gray itself with dust and grief, and slept on the grave of the man who had saved it. They began, without quite meaning to call it Ash. Winter came to the valley before anyone expected it, and still the small gray dragon would not leave the hill. The colonists of Halloway's Reach had 100 reasons to forget Ash. They had a settlement to rebuild. Half their southern wall was rubble. Their water lines were cracked from the Vorun fire, and the cold was coming down off the peaks faster than they could lay new pipe. People had real worries, human worries, and a grieving animal on a grave was not high on anyone's list. And yet they could not forget it. The woman who had promised Daniel, the young medic named Kara Voss, took it on herself to check on the creature each day. She climbed the hill every evening after her shift, carrying a bowl of warm broth and a strip of dried meat, and she set it down beside the gray stone and she waited. Most nights Ash did not even lift its head. The broth froze. The meat sat untouched until the wild birds took it. But Kara kept climbing the hill anyway, because she had given her word to a dying man, and because something about the small, stubborn shape on the grave would not let her stop. By the deep of winter, the colony had started to believe the dragon would die there. It had grown thinner. Its scales, once soft and pale, had gone dull. It slept almost all the time now, curled into a tight ball over Daniel's heart, and when the snow fell it let the snow cover it rather than move. Then one night, Kara found the bowl empty. She thought a bird had taken it at first, but the next night it was empty again, and the night after that, and slowly the little dragon began to lift its head when she came. It never left the grave. It never followed her down the hill, but it began to eat, and over the long cold months it began, against everyone's expectation, to grow. Word of the strange creature spread beyond the valley. Trade ships that stopped at Halloway's Reach carried the story outward, and the story changed in the telling, the way stories do. By spring there were travelers who came specifically to climb the hill and look at the dragon that mourned a human. Most stood at a respectful distance. Ash ignored them all. It only ever watched the road into the pass, the same road Daniel had died defending, as if it were still waiting for something to come down it. Not everyone who came was a friend. A Vorun survey craft passed through the system that spring, part of a wide sweep to map which human worlds were worth a second raid. Their scanners caught the heat signature of a live dragon on the hill, and one of their analysts, a creature named Tessal who studied lesser species for the war clans, ordered the ship to hold position and observe. Tessal watched the gray dragon for 2 full days through the craft's long lenses. It saw the creature lie on the stone. It saw the human female climb the hill with food. It saw the dragon refuse to leave even when storms lashed the peak. And Tessal, who had spent its whole life believing that loyalty was a thing only the great species possessed, felt something it could not name. In its report to the war clans, Tessal wrote that the humans of Halloway's Reach had somehow bonded a wild dragon to one of their dead. It called the behavior irrational. It called the creature a lesser beast tied to a lesser species, mourning a thing not worth mourning. It recommended the world be marked low priority, beneath the notice of any serious fleet. But Tessal did not delete the recording. It kept the images of the small gray dragon on the grave. And on long, quiet nights between assignments, it found itself watching them again, trying to understand what it had seen. The years turned, Ash grew. By its second winter the dragon was the size of a large hound, its scales gone from dull gray to a deep slate that caught silver in the moonlight. By its third it stood taller than a man at the shoulder, and the colonists who had once feared it would die now found themselves a little afraid of it instead. It had grown strong and quiet and watchful. It still slept on the grave every night. It still ate the food Kara brought, though now she needed a cart to carry enough. And it still watched the road. The colony had become, in a strange way, the dragon's family, and the dragon had become the colony's quiet legend. Children grew up knowing that the creature on the hill must never be disturbed. Old folks swore the dragon brought luck, that no real harm had come to Holloway's Reach since it began its vigil. Whether that was true or not, the people believed it, and belief has a power of its own. Kara, older now, with gray of her own coming into her hair, climbed the hill one warm evening and sat beside the great slate dragon as she often did. She told it about her day, the way she always did, knowing it could not understand and not caring. She told it the south wall was finally finished. She told it the water ran clean again. She told it that she still thought about Daniel, and that she hoped, wherever he was, he knew his last act had not been wasted. The dragon turned its huge dark eye toward her, and for the first time in 3 long years it made a sound that was not grief. A low, deep rumble, almost gentle, like distant thunder choosing to be kind. That was the night the hill first trembled. It was faint, just a shiver in the earth that Kara felt through the seat of her trousers and dismissed as a passing tremor. But Ash felt it too. The great dragon went still, every muscle tight, and pressed one clawed foot flat against the grave, as if listening to something stirring far below the stone. The tremors did not stop. They came once a week at first, then every few days, small shivers that ran up through the hill and faded before anyone could be sure they were real. The colony's old seismic gear, salvaged and patched together, could not agree on where they came from, but everyone who climbed to the grave noticed the same thing. The shaking was strongest at the top of the hill, right beneath the gray stone where Ash kept its watch. 5 years had passed since Daniel Reyes died. The dragon that slept on his grave was no longer small. It had grown into something vast and dark, its wings folding over the grave like a roof when it slept, its body longer than the colony's largest hauler. It could have left 100 times. It could have flown anywhere in the valley, anywhere on the world. It never did. It stayed on the hill, and now it stayed pressed low to the earth, listening to the thing that moved beneath it. Kara Voss, gray-haired and slower now, brought a colony engineer up the hill one morning to study the tremors. His name was Owen Pratt, a careful, nervous man who did not like dragons and liked unexplained shaking even less. He set his instruments around the grave, keeping a wide and respectful circle between himself and the slate beast watching him. The readings made no sense to him. There was something solid down there, something large and regular, buried far deeper than any natural rock formation should be. Metal, the instruments said. A great mass of worked metal, sleeping under the hill. Owen did not get to finish his survey. The Varung came back on a clear blue morning, and this time they did not come to raid. They came to stay. The war clans had finally decided that Holloway's Reach was worth taking after all, not for its people, who were still beneath their notice, but for what lay under its mountains. Deep scans had found rich veins of a rare ore in the peaks, the kind that powered Vorun warships, and the clans wanted it. A full settlement fleet dropped out of the sky, far larger than the raiders of 5 years before. Heavy landers, mining rigs, ground walkers built to crush stone and anything standing on it. They meant to dig the colony out like a splinter, and take the whole valley for themselves. Leading them was Tessal. The analyst had risen in the years since its strange report on the grieving dragon. It had argued for this world, had pushed the clans to claim it, and so it had been given command of the taking. Tessal rode down in the lead lander, and as the valley spread out below, it found its eyes drawn not to the colony or the mines, but to the green hill above the pass, and to the great dark shape that lay upon it. The dragon was still there. After 5 years it was still there. Tessal felt that same nameless thing it had felt long ago, watching through the lenses. It pushed the feeling down. Loyalty to the dead was a weakness of lesser things, it told itself. It gave the order to land. In the colony, the alarms went up. People who had been children during the first attack were grown now, and they remembered. They remembered Daniel. They remembered the pass held against impossible odds. They took up what weapons they had, knowing it would not be enough, knowing the fleet above them could glass the whole valley if it chose. But they stood anyway because running had never saved anyone, and because this was their home. On the hill, ash rose. The great dragon came to its feet for the first time in years, and the colonists below stopped what they were doing to stare. It spread its wings, and they stretched wider than anyone had guessed, two huge slate sails that threw a shadow across half the slope. It turned its head toward the descending Vorun landers, and let out a roar that rolled down the valley and shook the windows in their frames. But it did not fly to meet them. It did not leave the grave. Even now, with an army falling out of the sky, the dragon would not abandon its post. It planted itself over the gray stone, wings spread, and dared the enemy to come and take the hill from it. The Voruan walkers advanced through the pass, the same pass where Daniel had died, crushing the old collapsed stone flat beneath their feet. The colony's defenders fired and fell back, fired and fell back, the way Daniel had taught them in stories handed down for 5 years. It slowed the enemy. It did not stop them. And under the hill, the tremors became something else. It started as a low groan in the earth, so deep it was felt more than heard. The grave stone cracked clean across. Kara, who had refused to leave the hill, who stood beside the dragon with an old rifle in her shaking hands, felt the ground buckle beneath her boots. Owen Pratt's abandoned instruments, still scattered around the grave, screamed warnings before they were swallowed by the shifting soil. Ash threw back its head and roared again, but this was not a war cry. It was something between a challenge and a call, as if the dragon were answering the thing waking beneath it. The hill split open. A long crack tore down the slope from the grave, throwing up earth and stone, and from deep inside it came a light. Not fire, not the orange of the Vorun guns. A cold, clean blue light rising up out of the dark beneath the grave, growing brighter as something enormous shifted in its sleep and began, after long years buried, to wake. Tessal's lander stopped in midair. The whole Vorun advance faltered. And on the hill, standing over a grave that was breaking apart beneath her feet, Kara Voss began to laugh and cry at the same time, because she finally understood what Daniel had been buried on top of. The blue light climbed out of the broken hill until it lit the whole valley like a second sky. The Voruan walkers stood frozen in the pass. Their pilots, who had crushed 100 worlds and feared nothing soft enough to bleed, did not know what they were looking at, and so for the first time in years, they hesitated. Kara Voss knew. The old stories knew. She just had not believed them until now. Long before the colony of Halloway's Reach was founded, before the first families came down out of the sky to scratch a living from this rock, humanity had fought a war out here on the edge of charted space. It was a quiet war, mostly forgotten now, a desperate scramble of early colony fleets against raiders much like the Vorun. Humanity had lost more of those fights than it won. It had also, in the losing, learned to hide its strength in strange places. One of the things it had hidden was a ship. Not a colony ship or a hauler. A deep-strike vessel, the kind the old fleets buried on contested worlds as a last resort, a sleeping fortress meant to wake only if the world it guarded was attacked. The crews who built such ships were long dead. The fleets that planned them were long gone. The vessels themselves had been left dormant under the dirt of a dozen frontier worlds, forgotten by almost everyone, waiting for an enemy that might never come. One had been buried beneath this hill. The same battle that, generations later, the colonists half remembered as a first landing had been the burying of it. And when the settlers came and chose the high green hill above the pass as the place to lay their honored dead, they had never known that under the soft soil, under the gray stone they carved by hand, a war machine slept with its engines cold and its long memory dark. They had buried Daniel Reyes directly above it. And for 5 years, a dragon had slept on that grave, its great living heat soaking down into the earth, its body pressed against the stone, its grief keeping it rooted to the one spot in all the valley that mattered most. The colonists had thought it foolish. The Vorun had thought it pitiful, but the sleeping ship had felt it. Through 5 years of dormancy, it had registered the steady warmth and weight and loyalty of the creature above it, and it had begun, very slowly, the way a sleeper stirs at a familiar voice, to wake. The Vorun assault was the final push. The vessel's old sensors, dim and patient, caught the energy fire in the pass, the shape of enemy walkers, the same kind of attack it had been built and buried to answer. Deep in its core, ancient systems that had waited longer than the colony had existed came alive, ran their checks, and reached one conclusion. The world it guarded was under attack. Its long sleep was over. The hill did not so much break apart as open. The soil slid away in great sheets, and the gray stone with Daniel's name on it tilted and came to rest at an angle against the rising hull. Beneath it, vast and dark and webbed with that cold blue light, the Deep Strike vessel pushed up out of the earth where it had lain hidden for generations. It was huge, longer than the whole colony was wide, its surface scarred and old but its lines still sharp, still made for war. Ash did not run from it. The great dragon stood its ground on the shifting hill, wings spread, and as the hull rose beside it, something passed between the living creature and the waking machine. The vessel's sensors swept across the dragon and did not read it as a threat. They read it as a guardian. For 5 years, the only thing that had stood watch over this hill, over this grave, over the sleeping ship, had been the dragon. The vessel's old systems, built by humans who understood loyalty even if their enemies did not, marked Ash as a thing to be protected, not destroyed. Then the vessel turned its sensors on the valley below, and it found the colony. It read 400 human heat signatures behind a broken wall, surrounded, outnumbered, refusing to surrender. It read the same thing the Vorun had read and dismissed. But where the Vorun saw weakness, the old machine saw exactly what it had been built to defend. Kin. The vessel did not think in those words, but it recognized them all the same, the way a guard dog recognizes the children of the house it has watched over its whole life. Karavas stood on the open hill, soil sliding away beneath her boots, and watched the great hull come fully clear of the earth. The gray stone with Daniel's name on it sat against it, now like a small flat tooth against a mountain. She put her hand on the cold metal, and she found she was crying, though she could not have said why, except that it felt as if Daniel had reached up out of the ground one more time to protect them all. High above, in the lead lander, Tessel stared down at the impossible thing rising from the hill and felt every certainty it had ever held begin to crack. It had called these creatures lesser. It had called their loyalty weakness. It had filed the grieving dragon away as a curiosity, a sad small thing not worth a second thought. It had been wrong about all of it. The Deep Strike vessel's blue light flared once, blinding bright, and across its scarred old hull 1,000 dormant systems woke at once. Weapon ports that had not opened in generations ground slowly apart. The walkers in the pass began, far too late to back away. And on the hill above them, the great slate dragon that had slept 5 years on a soldier's grave threw back its head, and this time when it roared, the waking ship answered. For a long moment, nothing in the valley moved. The Vorun walkers stood frozen in the pass. The colonists held their breath behind the broken wall, and on the hill the great dragon and the greater ship faced the sky together, waiting. Then Tessel gave the order to fire, and the spell broke. The Vorun guns opened up all at once, a storm of orange light pouring down at the hill from the landers and up at it from the walkers in the pass. 5 years ago, that fire had killed Daniel Reyes and nearly broken the colony. Now it splashed against the Deep Strike vessel's old hull and did almost nothing at all. The ship had been built to take far worse from far stronger enemies. Its armor drank the fire and held. Then it answered. The vessel did not fire wildly. Its old systems were patient, precise, built by people who could not afford to waste a single shot. Lances of that cold blue light reached down from the hull and touched the walkers in the pass one by one the great machines came apart, their legs buckling, their bodies splitting open. The Vorun who had crushed the old battlefield flat moments before now scrambled backward over the rubble, and the rubble gave them nowhere to hide. But the ship could not do it alone. It had slept too long. Half its weapon ports never opened. Its movements were slow, its power flickering, generations of dormancy showing in every stutter of its light. The Vorun landers, recovering from their shock, began to climb out of its reach, lining up to bombard the hill from above where the old vessel's lances could not easily follow. That was when Ash flew. The great slate dragon had stood its ground for 5 years. It had refused to leave the grave even when the sky filled with enemies. But the grave was open now. The man it mourned a part of the very ship that fought beside it, and at last the dragon understood that to protect the hill it would have to leave it. With a single beat of wings that stretched wider than a lander, Ash threw itself into the sky. It went up like a thrown spear, fast and furious, straight at the climbing Vorun ships. The first lander never saw it coming. The dragon hit it from below, claws tearing through the hull, wings hammering, and the ship spun out of the air and fell burning into the valley far from the colony. The second lander turned its guns on the dragon, and Ash twisted around the fire with a grace that no creature its size should have had, born of 5 years of watching that road, that sky, learning every wind that moved through the valley. Below, the colonists found their courage. They had watched a soldier die for them once. They had watched a dragon mourn him for 5 years. Now they watched that same dragon and the ghost of that same soldier fight the enemy together, and they could not stand behind their wall and do nothing. They poured out of the colony, what few weapons they had raised high, and they pushed up the pass at the retreating Vorun ground troops, screaming Daniel's name as they came. Kara Voss led them. Gray-haired, slow, an old rifle in her hands that she barely knew how to fire, she went up that bloody pass at the front of her people because she had promised a dying man she would keep his dragon safe, and keeping the colony safe was the only way left to do it. It was not a fair fight in the end, but not the way the Vorun had expected. Caught between the waking ship on the hill, the furious dragon in the sky, and 400 humans who simply would not break, the great settlement fleet began to fall apart. The clans had come expecting to dig out a splinter. They had not come prepared to fight a war machine, a dragon, and a people who had buried their fear in the same ground as their dead. High above it all, Tessal watched its fleet come undone, and finally understood the thing it had felt years ago through the lenses, the nameless thing it had pushed down and called weakness. It was not weakness. It was the opposite. It was the strength that came from caring for something more than yourself, the strength that made a soldier run toward a falling hatchling instead of away, the strength that kept a dragon on a grave for 5 long years, the strength that woke a sleeping ship and sent 400 frightened people up a hill against an army. The Vorun did not have it, they had never had it, and so in the end they ran. Tessal gave the order to withdraw. The surviving landers turned for the sky, hauling their broken troops aboard. Fleeing the valley they had been so sure would fall in an afternoon. The deep strike vessel sent a last lance of blue light after them, not to destroy but to drive, herding the fleet up and out and gone. Ash chased them to the edge of the air, roaring, until the last black ship had vanished into the dark above. Then the great dragon turned and came down out of the sky in a long, slow spiral, back toward the broken hill, back toward the open grave and the ancient ship, and the people standing in the smoke of the pass. It landed beside the gray stone with Daniel's name on it, folded its wings, and looked down at the ship that had been buried beneath its grief for 5 years. The vessel's blue light pulsed once, soft now, almost gentle. The dragon lowered its head and pressed its brow against the cold old hull, and the two of them, the living guardian and the waking machine, stood together over the soldier who had brought them both into being. Below in the ruined pass, Kara Voss sat down in the mud and wept, and around her, her people began slowly to cheer. The smoke cleared slowly over Holloway's Reach. For a whole day the valley simply rested, too stunned to do much of anything, its people wandering the broken pass in a daze, hardly able to believe they were still alive to wander it. The Vorun did not come back. Tessal's broken fleet limped home and made its report, and the war clans, who had lost more ships taking nothing than they had lost in a dozen successful raids, marked Holloway's Reach with a new symbol in their records. It was a symbol they rarely used. It meant a world not to be touched. It meant, here the soft creatures are not soft. Here, even the dead fight back. Tessal never commanded a raid again. It went back to studying lesser species, but it studied them differently now. It kept the old recording of the grieving dragon on the grave, and beside it the new images of that same dragon tearing landers from the sky. It showed them to the young of its clan, the ones being raised to believe that strength was only ever a thing of size and fear. It told them they were wrong. Most did not listen. A few did. It was a start. On the hill, the great deep-strike vessel powered down. It had done what it was made and buried to do. The world it guarded was safe. Its old systems, flickering and tired after generations of sleep and one furious day of war, ran their final checks and found no more enemies in the sky. So the ship settled. It did not sink back under the earth, for the hill that had hidden it was broken open now and would never close again. Instead it lowered itself into the open ground and went still, its blue light fading from blinding to soft to a single steady glow deep in its core, like a heartbeat slowed to rest. It became a part of the hill then, a monument no one had built and no one could have imagined, a war machine grown over with grass and flowers in the seasons that followed, its scarred hull a shelter for birds, its silent guns pointed forever at the road into the pass. The colonists left it where it lay. It seemed wrong to do anything else. It had risen to save them. It could stay as long as it liked. They rebuilt the grave first, before they rebuilt anything else. The gray stone with Daniel's name on it had survived, cracked but whole, resting against the great hull where the hill had opened. The colonists set it upright again at the lip of the ship, and Kara Voss, with her own shaking hands, carved a second line beneath the first. The original had only ever said his name and the years he lived. The new line said what he had done. It said that he had given his life to save a single small creature, and that the creature had stayed, and that in staying it had saved them all. It was a long thing to carve into hard stone. Kara took 3 days to do it. Ash lay beside her the whole time, watching, the way it had once watched the road. For the dragon had come home to the hill, of course. Where else would it go? It had chased the Vorun to the edge of the sky, and then it had turned and come back, and now it lay where it had always lain, on the grave above the ship, in the one spot in all the world that mattered. But it was different now. The grief that had pressed it flat for 5 years was gone. It had done something with that grief at last. It had paid it forward into a battle won and a people saved. And now, finally, the dragon could simply rest. The galaxy heard the story, in the slow way the galaxy hears things. It traveled on trade ships and in the holds of haulers, changing in the telling, growing larger and stranger. But the heart of it stayed true, because the heart of it was too good to lose. A human had died to save a baby dragon. The dragon had slept on his grave. And when the enemy came, the earth beneath that grave had stirred, and what slept there had risen, and the soft creatures who could not possibly win had won. Other species heard it and did not know what to make of it. Some called it a fable. Some called it a warning. A few here and there heard it and understood, the way Tessal had finally understood, that there was a kind of strength that had nothing to do with size or fear, and that humanity, of all the species crawling across the dark, seemed to carry more of it than any other. It was a foolish strength by the measures of the great clans. It made no sense. A wise creature did not run toward a falling egg. A wise creature did not mourn a grave for 5 years. A wise creature did not march up a hill against an army with an old rifle in shaking hands. But the foolish creatures kept winning. And slowly, world by world and story by story, The great powers of the dark began to leave them alone. Years later, long after Kara Voss had been laid to rest on the same green hill, not far from Daniel and the silent ship, travelers still came to climb it. They came to see the war machine grown over with grass. They came to read the 2 lines on the gray stone. And most of all, they came to see the dragon. For Ash was always there. Fully grown now, vast and slate-dark and calm, it lay curled on the grave in the sun with its great wings folded and its huge dark eyes half closed. It did not mourn any more. It guarded. It kept the hill and the ship, and the soldier who slept beneath both, and it watched the road into the pass with the patience of a thing that had all the time in the world. The keeper of the hill, the colonists called it, and it slept on his grave at peace at last until the end of its long days.